Hey guys, welcome back to Tech Insights with Dylan White. It's Sunday, July 21st. We are back with day 8 of our 30-day journey to the SC-900 and day 4 of our 25-day march directly towards the SC-900. Today we're going to dive into the Entra capabilities all about authentication and access management. So on the other side, we'll be right into the modules. Let's get it. All right, guys, welcome back. So in this section from the Entra capabilities, we're going to be able to do 4 things, which is describe the authentication methods in Entra ID, describe multi-factor authentication, self-service password reset, and password protection. So let's get it. All right, so first off, authentication methods, passwords, right? Most common form of authentication, but they have many problems, right? Especially if using single factor authentication, right? You only need a password. They're easy enough to remember, they're easy enough for hackers to compromise. That's the simple thing, right? There's brute force attacks, but strong passwords aren't easily hacked, are difficult for members to either remember or to affect user and they affect user productivity, right? So there's a whole list, right? So bad password, good password plus some type of multi-factor, right? Which is SMS or voice, password and authenticator, right? Push notification, software tokens, hardware tokens, right? Um, the best is passwordless. We're not going to get all the way into that, but that's when we're using things like Windows Hello, or, Mac Face ID, 502 security keys, certificate based, right? All these things. It's newer technology, but it's been out for almost 5 years now too. Right? What phone authentication, right? It's SMS or voice call, right? So SMS is when you get a text message say, hey, enter your text code. Problem is hackers can still phish that. Say they have voice, hackers can then bypass it to their phone, that kind of thing, right? Then you have OAuth, right? So open authentication is a standard specifies how time-based one-time passwords are generated, right? So you have Entra ID generates a secret key or seed, right? That's input into the app, and you should generate each OTP, right? So that's when you have the Authenticator app. Google has one of their own. Auth has one. Auth0. There's all kinds. Duo, Okta, all these places they use OAuth to generate their codes. Then you have passwordless authentication, right? Which is the end goal for most cloud identities, right? To remove these passwords completely, right? Users will never know the password. They'll never ever need it. Right? Usually it's a random 20 something plus character code, right? Mixing letters, numbers, all that good stuff. And they can't easily be duplicated, right? And Entra ID provides ways natively to authenticate using passwordless methods, simply used to simplify the sign-in experience, right? And there's a video down below from the CVP. Right? So what is Windows Hello for Business? Right? It replaces passwords with strong 2FA, the two-factor authentication combination of a key or certificate tied to a device and something the person knows a PIN, right? Or something that person is biometrics, right? So on your Windows device, you can either enter your PIN, your Face ID, all that good stuff. Just really easy. And the password is stored in a certificate or key. Right? Then you have 502, right? It's open standard for passwordless, right? It's the latest standard that incorporates web authentication and is supported by Entra ID as well, right? So you have 502 security keys, which are unphishable, standards-based passwordless authentication method, right? They use Bluetooth or NFC, right, for their authentication methods. And so you have the Microsoft Authenticator app, right? It allows for self-service password reset. It's available for Android and iOS. The password sign-in, right? The Authenticator app turns or on any device, right? Whether that's your iPhone or Android, right? Turns it into a strong passwordless credential. Right? Your credentials are all stored into the Authenticator app. So that's why if you need ever get a new phone, you have to restore your Authenticator app, right? You can see there's some sign-in methods, all that good stuff. Certificate-based authentication uses X509 certificates against Entra ID, right? And all that is supported as a primary form as well. Right? So you can read through all these documents, but this is a good chart to understand the different authentication methods, what those primary and secondary are, right? So if you look here, we'll look at a few. Just Hello for Business, it's a primary authentication type, and then secondary authentication is MFA. Users must be enabled for 502. And if you look here, you have OAuth, right? Is it a primary? No, but secondary is MFA and SSPR. Very straightforward, but this diagram, I would memorize that just so you know the concept, because that will help you much more on the test. Now, what is MFA? Right? It's a process in which users are prompted during the sign-in process for an additional form of identification, such as code on a cell phone or a fingerprint scan. Right? Dramatically improves the security of an identity while still being simple enough for users. Right? The extra authentication factor must be something that's difficult for an attacker to obtain or duplicate. Right? Enter MFA is something you know, like password or PIN, and something you have, a trusted device that's not easily duplicated from a hardware key. And then something like biometrics, fingerprint scan, right? Every time you open the Authenticator app, it takes your face, right? So if you look, the additional forms of verification described in the previous unit can be used with MFA. So you have Authenticator app, Hello for Business, FIDO, OAuth, and SMS and voice, all that good stuff. Right, so you have security defaults. This is really good thing to know. Microsoft, roughly about 9 months ago, implemented what's called security defaults, ranging around MFA. Right, so it forces enter MFA registration for all users. It forces administrators to use MFA. It requires all users to complete MFA when you need it. Right? It's a great option for organizations who want to increase your security posture but don't know where to start. So a lot of organizations don't have a security administrator or engineer to help configure Microsoft. So Microsoft built in these security defaults. Right, and it's included with Entra P1 and P2 licensing. So for this unit, I would be able, if I was somebody studying this test, I would know these three things. So what is MFA? And I'll also know how you can support the verification. Then I'll also support and understand what security defaults are. Now, what is self-service password reset? Probably the help desk favorite tool of all, right? Self-service password reset is a feature of Entra ID that allows users to change their password without administrator or help desk involvement. Right? Key benefits are it reduces IT support costs, it allows users to get back to work faster and be more productive. Administrators can change settings to accommodate new security requirements or release changes out to users without disrupting sign-in. And then it also includes robust audit logs that are available from API. Right? Data will be imported to a SIM tool. So for instance, you can now track users when they do have to use SSPR. So you can see it, but most of this attacker was just signing in, right, and stealing the sign-in, right, and forcing a reset. And guess what? You would see that you could block it based on that location of the attacker. Right? And to use self-service password, users must be assigned a Microsoft Entra ID license. They must be enabled for self-service password reset, and they must be registered with the authentication methods they want to use. Right? And there's a whole setup process, and that will be in the administrator exam and won't be covered in this one. Right? Authentication method available for SSPR, mobile app, notification, app code, email, mobile phone, and office phone, and security questions. Obviously, the strongest of all being mobile app, right, and app code. When users register, they're prompted to choose authentication methods they'd like to use. If they choose to use security questions, they pick from a set to prompt for, and then provide their own answers. Security questions can be used during the self-service password reset process to confirm who you are, a secondary form of authentication. Right? They're not used as an authentication method during the sign-in event. Administrators can't use security questions as a verification. Right? So they have to use two of the other ones. Right? Very straightforward. For studying for this one, I would understand who can use what and when. Right? So the difference between a user and administrator. Then I would understand the authentication methods available and who, what users must be, right? Assigned, enabled, and registered. All right, password protection. Entra provides a lot of different details around password protection, so let's get into it. All right, it's a feature of Entra ID that reduces the risk of users using weak passwords, right? It detects and blocks known weak passwords and their variants. It can also block other weak terms that are specific to your organization, right? So with password protection, there's a default global banned password list. It's automatically applied to every user. Right? You can also support your own business security needs. You can define entries in a custom banned password list, right? So you can block them. So say my company name is Woodgrove, I can block any form of password with Woodgrove in it, right? So I can block Wood, 1, 2, 3, 4, Grove, whatever, right? I can block all these things. If it has Woodgrove in it, block it. A lot of companies have started using these, right? So the global password ban list, right? You understand that, right? So known weak passwords is automatically updated and enforced by Microsoft, right? Maintained by Entra ID protection team. Right? If variations are created using an algorithm to transpose text, case, and lettering numbers, right? 1 can become a 9, right? Microsoft Enter user tries to set their password to one of these weak passwords, they receive a notification to choose a more secure one. Right? It's real world. You can have, we talked just briefly about the custom band password list, company name, but look, again, brand, product, locations, or company specific internal terms, abbreviations. So it's all very straightforward. Password band lists are a feature of Enter P1 or P2. Right? So you need a minimum of P1. Right? And you can see right where that is, right? Password protection, custom band password list, yes, and there's your passwords. Right? Protect against password spray, it helps you defend. And how, right? They submit only a few of the known weakest password against each account, right? So you have 1,000 users, all of a sudden, all 1,000 users had a failed sign, right? For example, hybrid security, right? You can integrate Enter password protection with an on-prem AD, right? Component environment receives a global band password list and custom password protections for Enter. They then use them to process password change events, right? While the password protection improves the strength of the passwords, you should still use MFA, right? Example of defense in depth. Right? So we're not just using password protection and passwords. You should still use MFA. It just makes the Enter Cloud allows you to go from both on-prem again to hybrid. Right? Very, very agile. All right, let's see if we know what we're doing from authentication methods. Let's see. All right, so after hearing of a breach at a competitor, security team wants to improve identity, right, within their organization. What should they implement to provide the greatest protection to user identities? Right, security questions, strong passwords, MFA. MFA is going to win that one every time. As you take these tests and study, you should always start learning and understanding. If you haven't taken any certification, right, CompTIA, Microsoft, any vendor certification, most times on a test, especially when it's multiple choice, there's going to be 2 right answers, right? And then one of them is right based on the situation, right? So make sure you read it contextually. So which of the following additional forms of verification can we use with Enter MFA, right? So yeah, the Authenticator app, SMS, voice call, 502. In Windows, you have security questions, SMS, voice call, 502, and Windows Help for Business. And then you have password spray, right? So I think automatically we can get rid of this third one. So one of these 2. So if you look at it, right, what's the difference? You have security questions in this one and not in the top one. So look, additional forms of verification. You can use Microsoft Enter MFA. So for me, I say security questions. Right? Let's see, and I'll explain why in a second. Company's IT organization ask about ways to reduce IT costs without compromising security. Which features should they consider? Biometrics, 502, SSPR. When you read this, find ways to reduce IT costs. This one's the only one that's known to reduce IT costs. Let's check answers. Let's see. Nope. So I'm the Authenticator app, right? So security questions aren't valid for auth. So reading that should make sense, right? So the Authenticator app and security questions are subbed out. All right. Let's get back into it with the capabilities of Entra. All right, so we went through authentication methods. Let's get into access management. Right, so in this one, right, it's similar, but it's a little bit newer functions. We're going to just be able to describe conditional access, and describe Entra roles, role-based access control, otherwise known as RBAC, Romeo Bravo Alpha Charlie. All right, let's get into it. What is conditional access? This is probably the greatest tool in all of Entra ID to protect your organization. If you're not doing conditional access, go do it, please. It's a feature in Enter that provides an extra layer of security before allowing authenticated or unauthenticated users to try to access data and assets, right? It's implemented policies that are created and managed in Enter. User access policy analyzes signals, including user, location, device, application, and risk, to automate decisions for authorizing access to resources, right? So look here at this diagram, you can see what those signals are, and they're verifying every access attempt. Remember, verify, always. What's that part of? Zero trust model. This is a huge framework in zero trust, right? And conditional policies at their simplest are if-then statements, right? So if, as a user coming in on my iPhone, I'm probably gonna have a different conditional access policy than if I come in on my computer, right? It's just if-then access statements, right? Conditional access policies are enforced after first factor authentication is completed. Conditional access is intended to be an organization's first line of defense for scenarios like denial of service attacks, but it can use signals from these events to determine access, right? So when you read that important note, right, you think of simple scenarios like you've been ransomware and you have a break glass account. 99% of organizations should have a break glass account that has a separate conditional access policy, right, from all their standard users. Right. So what are the components of conditional access policies? Right. So if we look at this, we can see that we have assignments, right? Users, right? You have cloud applications or actions, conditions, right? And then you have access controls, right? Either grant session based. So if we look at assignments, right, you can say you have to determine what signals to use through assignments, and the assignments portion controls who, what, where, and when of conditional access, right? So users and groups assign who the policy will affect. Cloud outer actions, you can include or exclude cloud applications, user actions, or authentication context subject to the policy, right? Depending for cloud, conditional access enables real-time visibility and control of access to activities performed within your cloud environment, right? Conditions, right? Sign-in risk and user risk, integration with ID protection, conditional access policy that identify suspicious actions related to user accounts in the directory and trigger a policy, right? The sign risk is probably that given a sign-in or authentication request isn't authorized by the identity owner. The user risk is probably that given the identity account is compromised, right? Two different methods. Device platform, pretty straightforward, right? Is it mobile? Is it server? Like where is the authentication coming from? And then you have location based on IP. You have client apps, right? What kind of app is accessing, right? Browsers, mobile, desktop clients, etc. You have filters for devices, right? You can filter devices based on privileged access workstations, privileged, just different device groups, right? In essence, the assignment portion controls who, what, and where. Access controls, right? So you can have block, grant access, then you have session controls, right? So think of a session control as you can control things like the download, cut, copy, and print, the frequency, etc. So the assignments portion controls who, what, when, and where, right? And then the access portion controls how a policy is enforced. All right, let's get into role-based access control. Probably one of the more difficult things to understand because there's so many different roles throughout all of the Microsoft Cloud environments, right? Throughout Azure, throughout Entra, Intune, so many different roles. So we're just going to get into them just for Entra. A good friend of the community, Miro Fernando, posted something on LinkedIn. I'll put in the show notes, but there's over 100 roles now in Entra, and it's crazy. It gets really confusing because you can layer the roles. The basics, right? It's Entra roles control permissions to Entra resources, for example, allowing user accounts to be created or billing information to be viewed, right? It supports built-in and custom roles, right? Managing access roles is known as role-based access control, or RBAC. It's built-in and custom roles are a form of RBAC in Microsoft Entra roles. Control access to Entra resources is referred to Microsoft Entra RBAC. Right? So what are the built-in roles? So there's many of them with a fixed set of permissions, right? A few of the most common roles are global administrator, right? Users of this role have access to all administrator features in Entra. A person who signs up for the Entra tenant automatically becomes a global administrator. And you have a user administrator. This role, they can manage all aspects of users and groups. It also includes the ability to manage support tickets and monitor service health. Right? And you have a billing administrator that can make purchases, manage subscriptions, support tickets, and monitor service health. So if you look at the two layers, billing administrator and user administrator are very similar, except the billing administrator can also make purchases and manage subscriptions. Right? All built-in pre-configured bundles of permissions designed for specific tasks. That this set of permissions, including the built-in roles, can't be modified. Right? But what are custom roles? Right? So granting permissions using custom Entra roles is a two-step process. First step involves creating a custom role definition, consisting of a collection of permissions that you add from a preset list. Once you've created that role definition, the second step is to assign that role to users or groups by creating a role assignment. So custom roles require a Microsoft Entra ID P1 or P2 license. Right? RBAC, one of the most important founding features of RBAC is that policies in RBAC is that you only grant access the access people need, right? Least privilege. Best practices, right? Security, grant the users least privilege, right, to get their work done. Categories of Entra roles, right? So when I look at this and I think of things to study, right, from the RBAC perspective, and here I would say things is what's the difference between, right, what licensing, right, specific. Again, intra-specific roles, such as user administrator, application administrator, groups, right? Service-specific, right? SharePoint administrator, Intune, Exchange, etc. You have cross-service roles, right? Roles. So if you look at this, there's a good little diagram in here. You can see what the differences are, right? Difference between Microsoft Entra RBAC and Azure. There's a lot of overlap, right? So if you look here, there's really just two differences, right? Entra roles control access to Entra resources such as user groups and apps. Azure roles control access to Azure resources such as virtual machines or storage using Azure Resource Management. So if you want to look at it, Entra RBAC leverages just Entra, and Azure RBAC leverages the Azure Resource Management. It's just different data stores that they're accessing, right? So that's it. So let's take a knowledge check and see if we can get 100% this time. An organization plans to implement conditional access. What do admins need to do? Right. So you have three options, right? So create policies that enforce organizational rules, check that all users have MFA enabled, or amend your apps to allow conditional access. So from here, the only one that really makes sense is create policies that enforce organizational rules. Sign-in risk is a signal used by conditional access policy to decide whether to grant or deny access. So what is sign-in risk? So if you remember, there's two different options, right? So whether a compromise has happened or whether the user is who they say they are, right? So in the options, we have probability the device is owned by the identity owner, probability authentication request isn't authorized by the identity owner, probability that the user is authorized to view a particular application. So it's definitely not the third one. So it's either going to be one or two. Sign-in risk is always going to be, in my opinion, the second one. Let's see. IT admins have been asked to review Microsoft Entra roles to assign users to approve organizational security to the forms of the internet. Remove all global admin roles assigned to users. Create custom roles. Remove global admin roles with specific. Replace global admin roles with specific Entra roles. Release-based access. That's what we're always going to go with. Let's see. There we go. Got our 100%. So for sign-in risk, you just have to remember really what the two differences are, right? For sign-in risk and user risk, right? User risk is always going to be about account compromise. Sign-in risk is always going to be about authorized access. So with that being said, we've finished now. We've gone through authentication methods. We've also gone through the different access management capabilities. So we've gone through quite a bit already. And then going into tomorrow, Monday, we're going to go through three more sections. Let's see what they are. I believe they're going to get a lot more in depth, right? And so if we look at these, what we got going forward, we have identity protection capabilities, right? That's the last one in Entra. We're going to finish Entra with all about identity protection and governance, all right? And then we're going to move into the next piece, which is Microsoft Security Solutions, which is by far the longest section, right? So if we look at this, there's a lot in here, right? So we're talking about Azure infrastructure, we're talking about management capabilities, we're talking about Microsoft Sentinel, Defender XDR. There's lots going on here. We'll probably spend 3-4 days, almost a whole weekend here alone. So, and also go over different tools. So excited to dive into that with you guys. As always, thank you for sticking in there with me, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.